Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Brett's Brain. Today, we're going to talk about the difference between advisors and formal advisors and your board members. They're not the same thing. Hey, I'm Brett Brohl, former entrepreneur, current venture capitalist. Thanks so much for checking out the channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, do all those things. We're here to help entrepreneurs out. So if you have any questions, tell us. Put it in the comment section below. We love to answer them. We love to hear from you. And we'd love to be helpful to you on your entrepreneurial journey. All right. Advisors, formal advisors, and formal board members. Not the same thing. Very different, as a matter of fact. So what are they, and how should you work with them in different manners? Let's start with the advisory board or your formal advisors. So an advisory board can be anything from super informal friends, mentors that just want to see you succeed and are willing to help in some way, shape, or form. They can make an introduction to you, to formal advisors where you actually put a legal agreement in place between you and that person for their advisory or their advice. Now, really important to think through that and what that looks like. And the big mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make when they're bringing on formal advisors is they don't actually have real structure to the relationship and what it should look like and what you want to get out of it. So you got to think it through, because too many times founders will have like 17 advisors, and honestly, it's a bit of a time suck and they don't get as much value out of it, or they don't get enough value out of it relative to the time they put into it. So my advice to founders is keep the advisors you have around you to a relative small number and make sure you put structure around that relationship so you are defining really clearly what you're going to get out of it and what the advisor is going to get out of it. It's a two-sided street here. So if you have an advisor that's willing to help you with sales and they say, hey, I can make 100 introductions for you over the next year, write that down and say, okay, let's put it together an advisory agreement. And it's a 2-year agreement. And over the next 2 years, you're going to make 100 introductions for us. And that 100 introductions is what you're vested on. And so when I speak about vesting, that means you're going to compensate them. And almost all advisory relationships, formal advisory relationships, do have some form of compensation involved. And it's almost always equity. And that's great. Like, you should use equity as a tool. It's one of the biggest tools you have as a founder. That's a great way to compensate somebody that will do something for you. But don't give equity out to an advisor without having really, really formal, structured outcomes from that advisor. And it could be anything. It could be, hey, you're going to meet with me weekly for half hour, and you're going to do that for 2 years. That's structured. That's formal. And you put that in your formal legal document. And in exchange for that, as long as you do that for 2 years, you're going to vest and you're going to earn this equity grant that we're going to give you. It could be around sales. It could be around time commitments. It could be around office space that they're letting you borrow. There's all different things advisors can bring to the table for you. And you're going to exchange some of your equity for that. But be thoughtful about it. Don't just give out shares. And don't give out shares without setting expectations of what you're going to get. That happens far too frequently. And honestly, it's not the advisor's fault. Like, advisors aren't trying to take advantage of startups. What happens is that neither side in this agreement or in this partnership really comes to it with any structure. And so when you don't have structure and you don't have a process, you tend not to get much out of a thing. And so it's your job as the entrepreneur to put that structure in place. Don't expect the advisor to do it. Be very specific, be very formal, ask, and then write it down. Put it in a formal agreement, and then issue the shares. So that's the advisory. The advisor has no rights around making decisions for your company. They have no rights. They have no fiduciary responsibility to your company. They can't vote unless they're also an investor. And so it's very different from what is your formal board member, which is what we'll transition to now. Now, as a startup, you often will create a formal board. That usually happens after your first round of institutional capital. Occasionally, you might put one together before that, but in general, the vast majority of startups have a formal board after they raise their first round of institutional capital. You honestly don't really need it until you have those investors. So if you have people pushing you or advisors pushing you to put together a board before that, I'd push back and be really, really careful about it. That usually isn't the case in the market. Your formal board does have fiduciary responsibility around your company and around for all shareholders. So they represent all shareholders, common and preferred. They vote on things like if you're going to get acquired, or if you want to raise more capital, or if you're going to issue additional equity to an advisor. That's what the formal board does, amongst other things. They approve budgets, and your formal board meets regularly. Usually it's quarterly. And one thing that's important to note is that as a formal board member, when I'm an investor, we don't take additional advisory shares. That's not market. So if you have an investor that wants to invest in your company, but also wants shares to sit on your board, that's usually not normal at the pre-seed, seed stage for startups or Series A. Usually an investor that comes in and takes a board seat is going to do that because they're vested in you, because they put money to work. They want you to succeed, and they want to provide help and oversight to the company to make sure that everybody's doing the best they can to build a company that will succeed and return, multiples of that capital to all of their shareholders. An advisory board person doesn't have that responsibility to all shareholders. Their job is to work with the CEO, or you can have advisors that work with your CTO or your CPO or anybody. You don't have to have an advisor just for the CEO. Where your formal board member is going to also help with strategy, advice, things like that, but they're not going to take that additional shares, and they do have fiduciary responsibility. So those are the two core differences between advisors and advisory boards and formal boards. One commonality between the two things, the board of directors and your advisory board, is that to get the most out of them, you have to provide structure. You have to run the process as the founder, as the entrepreneur. If you don't put processes in place and you don't run really, really formal boards either way, you're not going to get much value out of them. So be thoughtful about your board meetings. What do you want to get out of it? What are you going to ask your board members? What help do you need? Same thing with your advisors. When you meet with them, what do you want to get out of them? Be structured, be thoughtful about it, and then you can get a lot out of them. If you don't have the time to put that structure or process in place, it's not worth bringing advisors on. If you like this content, make sure you share, like, subscribe, do all those things, and ask us questions. We'd love to get to them and answer them in future videos.